I should have logged into my computer beforehand. We're going to have to roll with it because I'm not about to sit here and like fiddle with this for 20 minutes because it's already past 12. It is 12:09. I ain't trying to sponsor nobody. Ain't nobody got time for that. Let's jump in. This might be a lengthier review. Oh, I didn't ramble. When I don't ramble, this is what's funny. Some people really hate the rambling, which I don't care. And other people really like it. Most people actually like the rambling. So, I mean, I don't care whether you liked it or not. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. But Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This book. Let's jump in because we have a lot to discuss. And to be honest, do you hear how chunky that junker is? She thick, man. That girl thick. Help me, Lord. I'm not right in the head. You made me this way. Jesus, you made me a little weird. Okay. Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove is one of those books that when you let people know you're reading it or you're about to read it or whatever the case may be, people fangirl for it. Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite books of all time. You're going to love it. It's great. It's epic. It's this, that, and the third. I mean, this book is like, it's definitely the internet book sphere's darlings. It's one of those books. East of Eden is like that too. You announce that you're reading East of Eden and people freak out for good reason. So Lonesome Dove, it's a Western, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but at first, when I first picked it up, I wasn't sure how lengthy of a review this was going to be. Like, what could I actually pull out from this book that, is it going to be a long review? Is it going to be a short review? This is one of those books you could purely read for entertainment. But I was surprised about how much I was able to pull out. And yeah, my edition is over 800 pages. This is the edition that most people read from, but it's over 800 pages. And not every book that's 800 pages is going to require a Brothers Karamazov review, that type of detail. And this isn't, but there was a lot more that I pulled out. Now I'm rambling and repeating myself. So also this collar is giving vintage. This is not a vintage piece because I don't have the patience to thrift, but I was trying to pick something festive because I'm recording this in December and what have you, but this collar is something else. I typically wear this sweater to work. Anyway, perhaps after so many mistakes, your mind finally broke loose and wandered back and forth between past and present. So, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. It is a Western, like I said. The cover makes that obvious. I mean, come on. You got cowboys on horses. I mean, it's a Western, right? Okay. And I don't normally read Westerns. Actually, the only other Western I've read is Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. And that is a Western. That's like that's a philosophical Western. It's not your traditional Western. This is definitely more of a traditional Western. But it's like the Western for those who wouldn't be necessarily gravitate towards Westerns. It's the Western for people who like Westerns. I think it's just one of those books that regardless of what type of genre you prefer to read, this is overall a crowd pleaser, but I know that there are people, of course, who aren't going to like it, and that's fine. Perfect. But in this book, we have a group of odd cowboys, and they're driving a herd of cattle from Texas to Montana a few decades after the American Civil War. That is a long way to go. They're pretty much going from south to north, the whole length of the country up the middle, right? Montana, from Texas to Montana. On horseback. That's crazy. Do you know what that would take to just drive in the modern era, in the modern day? That's 3,000 miles, I think. All right. This book sucked me in. It did. We'll get to that in the end. This is I see why this is a crowd pleaser. But I'm 7 minutes in, almost unedited. Let's jump into these themes, because there were quite a few things that really stuck out to me in this book, because I thought that this was going to be a book that was going to be just a pleasure read, and it was, but it has a lot of interesting themes. There's a lot of romance versus reality in this novel. So we have two infamous cowboys, Augustus and Cal. I'm going to call him Cal because it's Call. And they are in their, I guess, middle to later years in life. You know, I'm gonna guess 40s, 50s. They're older gentlemen, more mature gentlemen. And they were renowned in their prime in the West, you know. And so there are still some people around in the West who know Augustus and Cal and all of their goings on. But, you know, now mainly Cal is putting together this group of cowboys because he got it into his mind to drive cattle from Texas to Montana and then settle in Montana. They do pass Yosemite. Is it or Yellowstone? Sorry, Yellowstone. It's Yellowstone. Yosemite is a little bit farther out, but Yellowstone, what is now Yellowstone National Park. But so, and it's this attempt to like set up a completely different type of life. I mean, the geography differences between the two states, Texas and Montana, are night and day, because they're in the part of Texas, Lonesome Dove, this little town, that is dry and they don't get a lot of rain. And when it does rain, it just gets muddy, to lush, green, but very cold, a different type of harsh weather with mountains and bears, right? So he has this notion, and with him, he's putting together this group of men, and a lot of young men are selected from the area, or, you know, around where they currently are when the story starts in Texas. And a lot of them are really just teenagers. And so a lot of them are still green, right? And so this journey is going to mature them. There's a young man in particular, he's about 17, named Newt. And his lineage is questioned throughout the novel, meaning who the daddy? Who your daddy? Who is the daddy? Are you or are you not the father? We need Maury. We need the Maury show. That show is so ratchet. And I would say, if you haven't read this book yet, there is a foreword by Larry McMurtry. I guess you could, he reveals Newt's parentage. I don't consider it much of a spoiler. For me, it didn't ruin the book. But if you really, really don't want to know, don't read it. Also, I mean, for him to put that in a foreword, I guess he's letting you know this isn't much of a spoiler, because the reader could deduce who it is very quickly on and very easily. Because Larry McMurtry himself is saying that overall, everything aside, this is a book about fatherhood. But anyway, who is his daddy? So Newt is really, out of all these other young men who are selected, Newt is really the focus here when it comes to this theme of romance versus reality, because Newt is a sensitive young man. He's very sweet. He's not effeminate. He's just sweet. He has a kind soul. But he does learn that life is harsh and hard. He cries quite a bit. He's just a gentler soul. But he does go through his own maturing process. Maturation, if you will. The boy hadn't been anywhere, so it was all romance to him. And again, as he witnesses some gruesome deaths along the way between Texas and Montana, and, you know, other things happen on the road, and it does wake him up to the harsh realities of life. Just checking my time. As I was reading Lonesome Dove, it actually surprisingly reminded me of Homer's The Odyssey, which was a shock to me. There are some very strange characters that pop up in this novel. Some of them make more than one appearance. Others, they appear once and that's it. But there's something mythological about these characters and how they pop up. They've got these weird quirks. They've got these very distinct appearances. And I'm going to get into two of those examples. So if you like the Odyssey and how, Odysseus is traveling on his way back home from, Troy, after the Iliad, the Odyssey picks up and he's on his way back to Penelope and his son, Telemachus, as I like to call him. He meets these, mythological characters and Greek gods. These characters in Lonesome Dove come across some bizarre people. And it felt like I was reading a myth of the American West that is no longer, where it's just mayhem and chaos, and there's Native Americans, there's / Indians, and it is just the Wild West, which doesn't exist anymore. And Larry McMurtry is writing a West that is dwindling at this point, especially as, the U.S. government keeps pushing out this way. From coast to coast, you have settlements and towns at this point. There is definitely something otherworldly about these scenes. Cautiously, he turned over, only to see at once that the source of the sound was Os Frank. He had risen in the night and collected another load of buffalo bones. Now he was heaping them up on the pyramid. The sound that had awakened Augustus was the sound of bones clicking and rattling as they slipped down the side of the pyramid. But when he turned his head, it was a white man he saw, a very old, small, white man in patched buckskins. The old man had a tobacco-stained beard and a bowie knife in his hand. A spotted horse grazed nearby. The old man just sat squatting there, watching. If you like the Odyssey, you'll like those types of bits. And there were other points where I was like, there's something mythological about it. Same with Cold Mountain. I've talked about Cold Mountain, how Cold Mountain is really an odyssey from this Confederate deserter who is leaving Virginia. He's deserted the Confederate Army during the American Civil War, and he's going down to South Carolina on foot, and he meets some weird people along the way. You could read the Odyssey, Cold Mountain, and Lonesome Dove and see a running theme amongst the three of them. So as is typical for most Westerns, and I say as is typical, okay, granted, this is only the second Western I've ever read, grammar. But I've actually seen a lot of Western movies. I grew up in a household with my dad. For there was a period of time he loved a John Wayne movie. Okay, but Westerns are typically very masculine stories, and there are very few female characters in Lonesome Dove. However, the female characters that are in Lonesome Dove, they are very distinct. They are fearsome things to behold in their own way. Like, for example, Clara, however you want to say it. That is Augustus's fiery former bootang. Okay, they still got a little tang for each other after all these years. She makes a prominent appearance at one point in the story. She is just a feisty thing. There's a phrase in the northern part of the United States. I think it's more around like the Massachusetts type area. You would call her a firecracker. You would call her a firecracker. She's a lot, but I like her a lot. She's a good character. Then we have Lorena. And she is the female character that pops up first in the story. I want to say around one of the first female characters in the story, and she's there for the whole duration. She ends up going on this cattle drive with these cowboys. She's the only woman on this drive. And she is a very quiet woman. She's had a hard upbringing. She's had rough life experiences. She is also a prostitute. And that has a lot to do with her silence. She's been abused her whole life. And she is very guarded around men in particular. And she hasn't had many interactions actually with women. She's been stripped of everything that she knows. But Lorena is I could write a dissertation on Lorena alone. She's very fascinating to me. And her relationship with Augustus, I think, is probably one of my favorite relationships in the whole story. But I'm not going to go too far into that because when you're reading it for the first time and watching it develop, it's a joy to watch that develop. Lorena's spirits sunk so low she ceased to want to talk. She became a silent woman. She had an ordeal, but she's young. She won't forget it, but she might outlive it. And again, her silence is a means of protection. The less that Lorena says, the more she's protecting herself. Because one thing that you can't get at a person, no matter how much you physically abuse them or verbally abuse them, emotionally abuse them, when you choose to remain silent, there's always going to be a part of you that remains an enigma. The only person that really understands Lorena is Augustus. You could maybe argue another character, but that might be a spoiler. There is a lot of violence in this story and death, because I feel like that would be inevitable in a Western. This is, the remains of the Wild West. It's post-Civil War, American Civil War. There's still a lot of mayhem and chaos going on. Okay. You still have Indians and cowboys, right? Even though that is dwindling, you still have it. Where people also take justice into their own hands. That's what Augustus and Call were known for. They're taking a form of justice into their own hands, and have been for a long time. But with that, McMurtry is really focusing a lot on death in this book because it is inevitable. We'll all experience it, but in this book, there are some very noticeable, notable deaths that happen, especially with how they happen. Some of them are very gruesome and sad. So I found the way that McMurtry focuses on death in this story very interesting. Because at this point, especially with Augustus and Call, I don't know what to call him, no pun intended, they've seen a lot of death and violence. But there are certain deaths that happen in this story that impact them in a different way. Call, how do you guys say it? He seems to be quite, I'm eating my hair, hold on, stoic about death from the outside looking in. But regardless of how stoic some of these characters may seem on the outside, there's still a sting to it, especially when it's a death of someone that you've known for decades. It was an odd thing, but true, that the death of an enemy could affect you as much as the death of a friend. Why interrupt it for a death that couldn't be helped? And death was not something you could ignore. It had its weight. It was a dead man lying upstairs, not a man who was sick. It seemed to her she had better not form the practice of ignoring death. If she tried it, death would find a way to answer back. It would take another of her loved ones to remind her to respect it. As I've kind of mentioned, and I'm just looking at my time, this is going to be a longer review for sure. There's a lot to discuss here. I still have a couple. We're going to focus on Cal. I mean, you could, each of these characters, Augustus, Lorena, Cal, Clara, whatever you want to call her, Dietz is amazing, Newt, you could write a mini thesis on each of these characters because McMurtry, these characters are larger than life, okay? They are just dynamic. And of course, in an 800 plus page book, he gonna kill off someone you really enjoy. Just warning, that is going to happen, but I'm not going to tell you who because it's more than one. You really, I'll speak for myself, got attached to some of these characters. So McMurtry was out here hurting my feelings, but okay. But I really want to focus on Call because I find him to be the most complex and he's hard to get a read on purpose. He's a stoic, quiet man. He is the leader of this group. And of this cattle drive. And through the eyes of the men, you could argue except Augustus, because I'm going to call him Cal and Call. They have known each other the longest. They've been through the most together. So Augustus is the only one who can really see through him. But to everybody else, Cal, Call, whatever, is infallible. However, Call in a lot of ways has imposter syndrome. He holds himself to impossibly high standards that maybe even the others aren't necessarily holding him to. They do hold him to a high standard, but they don't see him as, he's holding himself to an even higher standard. And yet he's just a man, right? He's just a man. He's also imperfect, and he has a difficult time reconciling his mistakes with the view his men have of him because he's not perfect, obviously. So Call, he's just a man. But he put so much pressure on himself. It seemed to undermine all that he was or that people thought he was. It made all his trying, his work, his discipline seem fraudulent and caused him to wonder if his life had sense at all. All his life he had preached honesty to his men. It had summarily discharge those who were not capable of it. Though they had mostly only lied about duties neglected or orders sloppily executed, he himself was far worse, for he had been dishonest about his own son. Call to the other men, he is the epitome of a strong leader. They look to him for everything. What do we do? Where do we go? What's this? What's that? And in his older years, particularly in the time of this cattle drive this journey that they're taking, he feels the weight more than ever of this type of expectation as a leader that's been put on him. And he's starting to feel wary of it. It was peculiar to seem so infallible in their eyes and yet feel so empty and sad when he thought of himself. That is actually probably my favorite quote of the whole book. I think most people can relate to that, where people can have a certain vision of you because you present a certain way, but they're not living in your head. So they don't know all of the insecurities and self-doubt, again, imposter syndrome that goes on within all of us. Just because a person may look a certain way, present a certain way, seem put together, there's always a story behind the eyes, right? Right. And people forget that. The old sense of being responsible for their well-being had left him so completely that he often wondered how he could ever have felt it so strongly. The way they looked at him in the morning as they waited for orders irritated him more and more. Why should grown men wait for orders every day after coming 3,000 miles? But that is the burden of a leader. People are going to look up to you, even if these other people, these other men or women could make the decision themselves eventually. When you have a leader who is strong, because he is a strong leader, he has good judgment he knows his stuff when it comes to what they're doing in this book. It is a weight. It is a pressure. But that's what happens when you have a good leader. It comes with the territory. But can you blame him at times for feeling exhausted by it? Especially when, he's been doing this for so long, but he has the weight of the world on his shoulders in a lot of ways, and he feels the pressure of it. Because that's just when you're called to be a leader, that's almost like the cross that you have to bear. In my opinion, it wouldn't be a good Western if there's not a good horse in this novel. And there is an iconic horse in this novel. Call has an infamous, spicy, hard to manage mare called the Hell Bitch. What a name, okay? And this horse at the very beginning of the novel bites him, gets a chunk out of his hand while he's, taming this mare. But he is very talented with horses, and he tames this horse, and this horse has a stamina. This mare has a stamina. He has the best horse in the territory, and that horse is the envy of everybody else. And this horse can go for hundreds of miles, and not need to be as rested or watered as all the other horses. But what's interesting is Call, he's not good with women. He's not. He is very awkward around women. He does not like the company of women. Women get on his nerves, actually. He prefers not to be around women and really wants nothing to do with women. But he's very good with a female horse. That's an interesting dichotomy. There is another character in the later sections of the book, Clara's husband. He is not good with horses, but he's, I guess you could say in a way, successfully married. And by successful, I mean his marriage has lasted, and he has daughters, and his daughters adore him. And you could see that that's an interesting comparison to kind of draw, even though both men are very flawed in their own ways. There's plenty of gentle horses in this world. Why would a man with your responsibilities want to waste time with a filly that's got to be hobbled and blindfolded before you can even keep a saddle on her? That's Augustus. Augustus is my favorite character in the whole book. He is funny. And again, I didn't really focus on Augustus here because, again, I just don't have the time. But I also think what you see with Augustus is what you get, even though he's such a fun character. Before I wrap up, again, this is about 30 minutes. Before I wrap up, there is an interesting theme in Lonesome Dove surrounding names. I also have noticed this in East of Eden from a slightly different angle. But in this story, Cal does not call certain characters by their names. And he does it on purpose because when you call somebody by their name, you have to acknowledge something about them. You're acknowledging their existence. You're acknowledging what they've been named. A lot of times, emotion can come out when you say some people's names. Like when you really love a person or you're really fond of a person, you say their name a certain way. When you don't like somebody, their name may come out a certain way. There's a lot in a name. There's a lot in what happens when you say a certain name, or say a name a certain way rather. And names have meanings. So when you call a person by their name, you're also calling them by the meaning of that name, right? And so Augustus gets on Cal about this throughout the entire novel, how you will not call certain people by their name. He was like, why won't you say the name? And Augustus says, not naming him is mistreatment. It is very dismissive when you refuse to call somebody by their name. So, and again, it just goes to show also how complex and often just not right Cal is. There are many times, and Larry McMurtry puts this in the foreword, where Cal had the opportunity to make certain things right with some of these characters, and he's stuck in his ways. And I think it goes to show, it shows a lot about a person's character, doesn't it? But, often a lot of people actually don't change. Change is very difficult to do. One is self-improvement, but you could spend a whole dissertation on just the theme of names in this book. I can't wait to talk about names in East of Eden because it's coming from a different angle. But yeah, let's wrap up because we're a little over 30 minutes. I knew that Lonesome Dove was going to be a top read of 2024 for me. And I was right. That's in my video, top reads of 2024. It is a massive book, but it does read quickly because especially once you get through the first part, that's setting everything up and setting all these characters up. And even though that's the slowest part of the book, it's still very engaging. It just reads quickly. What's happening next? What's happening next? What's happening next? There's parts of it that are very cinematic. I mean, it is a movie. I haven't watched the movie. Don't know if I will, but it's a sweeping novel with an expansive setting and very fascinating, quirky, funny characters. They're very flawed characters, which is part of the charm. And again, I read this at the last quarter of 2024, so October to early November. And for an 800 plus page book, for me to knock it out in 5 to 6 weeks, especially this year or in 2024 when my reading was a lot slower in general, that says something about the book. McMurtry's prose is simple. And once you really do settle into the simplicity of his writing, again, the pages fly. Even if you're not into Westerns, this book is easy to get into because it's largely character driven. But the environment of the novel could also be seen as a character, if you want to look at it that way. McMurtry, though, does not sugarcoat Western life, especially post-American Civil War. It's a gruesome book. I'm not going to lie. It's violent. But if it wasn't, it would not seem realistic. It's the setting. It's the Wild West. It's the remnants of the Wild West. It's post-American Civil War. There's a lot that has just gone on in the country, such a very young country that's getting its life together. I mean, a lot of social turmoil post-war in the South, after the South lost the Civil War. So there's a lot going on. And again, but to me, it's all part of its charm. It is also unapologetically male. And I mean that in the best way. It's a Western. It's a bunch of dudes. And I do read a lot of female authors. In a lot of contemporary literature, I think it's very feminine. There's a lot of female authors, and a lot of them, I read a lot of these contemporary releases. This book was published in the 1980 something, 1985, 86, something around there. I was not born. And it's just the female voice, the female voice, the female voice, the female voice, to the point where it's actually disproportionate. Like what is being published today contemporarily is not proportionate. And I really could rant about that, but that's not what this video is for. And not only that, you're really only getting one side of female voices. Just saying. And I actually find it frustrating. But this is a very masculine story. It's rugged and it's male relationships, which we aren't really getting in publishing these days. And so for me, that was also refreshing. I gave it a 5 out of 5. Immaculate. I read it at the perfect time after a challenging year. 2024 was strange, but this book was a comfort. And so, highly recommend. Have you read Lonesome Dove? I think most people have in my comments. Have you read it? Are you thinking about reading it? If you're thinking about reading it, go for it. Don't hesitate. Go for it. It's a wild ride. 5 out of 5, like I said. Please feel free to like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more book shenanigans. I post all of my content there first, once a week, and my brain blanked. And I also post frequently in my Instagram stories just things that make me chuckle, because why not? Life is short. We need to laugh. Anyway, laughter is medicine. And with that, I will sign out. Bye.